consoles.
No, although I could talk about that for hours.
We should do a history episode one of these days.
I would love to do that sometime.
Talk about, what we could talk about is the similarities between the Roman Republic to Empire to the American Republic to American Empire.
There's reasons I believe we're in the last days of the Republic, but that's something Grant knows, and we'll get into another time.
Yeah, we'll have to do a full episode on that.
Ooh, and I'm not saying that happily. I'm saying that things.
Well, we're not expressing optimism.
No.
We're just observing the status quo.
Exactly. And our security is something that I'm most concerned with. That being said, very briefly, one thing that I think people discount for video games is that small amounts of video games are actually very good for decision making.
Oh yeah.
And that's something that we don't talk about enough in society.
Let's talk about it. We got time.
They're not okay. So if we got time, that's all you need to say.
Yeah.
Video games aren't just bad. Obviously, as with anything, you taken to an extreme, they can be addictive, they can be problematic. Nevertheless, decision making is one of the most important skills an individual can have moving forward. And there's a lot of evidence from both a neurological perspective and from just an economic perspective that people who play a substantial amount of video games, 1 to 3 hours a week, shall we say, tend to have better decision-making skills, especially in on-the-fly, high-pressure situations, than people who don't. Because in many ways, what a video game is, when you're Link and you're trying to slay the orc or the goblin.
Oh, you're going back to Zelda.
Oh yeah,
I thought you were talking about like Call of Duty and Fork Knife.
No. I'm a man of the classics.
He's a man of culture.
I'm a man of culture. The issue you see is that when you are in that kind of a high pressure, high octane situation, you have to make a quick decision about what you are going to do from this response instantaneously. And oftentimes you have no idea what the enemy is going to do because it's the first time you've encountered that type of enemy.
And then pull the trigger.
It's a learning experience. It's a practice and exercise. And yes, it causes the release of dopamine in your brain, but it also gets you used to the idea of problem solving when you are at a situation of minimal information beforehand. Again, another reason why Japanese people, as a general rule, are fantastic at decision-making processes. It's, again, another aspect that's baked into culture.
Let me ask, is there more balance as far as video games built into that culture than in America? Because I know many people, and I know that like video game addiction or just drug addiction through the video game controller is rampant, right? A video game, in my mind, guys, a video game controller is just a dopamine dispenser dressed up with joysticks and buttons. And that's what it is for many people. For many others, though, it is a community, a portal to their community.
Yeah.
I know so many gaming groups, and I game with a couple people.
Yeah.
And that's where, you get to, like, while you're running around the map, you're like, oh, bro, how was work today? Oh, they had me working out there. It was hot.
Exactly. And it's really good for building communities as well. There's a lot of really positive things that are involved in the gaming industry that we don't talk about because, to be honest, in society, we spend a lot of time focusing on the negatives. We don't focus as much on the positives. And that's not to say there are not negatives. That's just to say that the positives are also things we shouldn't ignore entirely. That even in your downtime, in your free time, when you're playing video games, you're essentially learning how to act in lack of a better mindset. Like,
wow, that's powerful.
You are facing it. You are facing your dragons, living through an avatar. You're fighting Bowser, playing as a plumber. You are fighting Beast Ganondorf, playing as Link. You are fighting terrorists as a Rainbow Six character. Any number of these things, you are fighting your dragons using that thing as an avatar. And yes, in excess, that's bad. If that's all you do in life, obviously it's a virtual world that doesn't correspond necessarily one-to-one with the physical, so you shouldn't just get lost in it. But that isn't to say you shouldn't practice it and you shouldn't know what it is like to act in pressurized situations.
Wow. I totally get that.
But the thing is, we don't have that conversation. Like what I just said might be the first person that a lot of you have heard that.
It is important to learn how to act in that way, and I'm concerned that might not translate over to real life too well.
Absolutely.
But it's a learned skill nonetheless, I suppose.
Yeah.
Being put into those situations, and what you said especially is high-ish pressure situations whether it be high pressure from your teammates or if you're like gaming for money, that's not. I don't want to pass judgment on that. I've usually thought that like gaming for money is, that's dangerous, dude.
Yeah, I would also say that running into someone else at full speed while wearing a flimsy little plastic helmet is dangerous.
Sure, and that happens on the daily.
We do not criticize anybody for running into each other for that reason.
Yeah, there's people out there who criticize American football,
but not still. The players.
Yep.
But whereas we're happy to criticize esport players.
I see. Yeah, that is a difference.
It's a bit of a, but all I'm saying is that as football is good for your body and for your mind to get physically active, to build that type of community and team aspect, video games train your mind in other ways that are not necessarily bad for you.
So what are the indicators of taking it too far or abuse?
As with a lot of situations of addiction, I want to clarify very briefly when we talk about addiction. If you bring up the word addiction to a neuroscientist, they're going to roll their eyes and be like, you don't know what addiction is. Because addiction is specifically something that travels along the mesolimbic system. We're talking heroin, cocaine, those types of things. Even alcohol, which causes activation or suppression along paths in the lower half of your brain. That's when you talk about addiction, a lot of people will just say, you have no idea what you're talking about. But that doesn't entail the entire process. There are also aspects of cortical addiction that we do not talk about enough, the more conventional things. These are the things that you're psychologically incredibly attached to that aren't necessarily giving you a stimulus that's traveling through your brainstem.
Wait a second, really? Because I was going to say, like Pavlovian, but this, without a stimulus, where's the motivation?
The motivation is cortical.
Okay, I see.
It's activating different structures.
It's past the dopamine phase.
It's past like the periaqueductal gray. It's past the mesolimbic pathways, and it's straight in the cortex as functioning. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't matter. It's not to say that this is the same kind of addiction. It's just know that this isn't heroin. This isn't cocaine. These are in fact different things. So to brush them all with the same paint of addiction is a little bit diminutive towards heroin and cocaine.
Yeah.
Again, don't do heroin, don't do cocaine, don't do drugs.
Yeah, kids. Cocaine is one hell of a drug.
Dare to not. That was so painful. We laughed.
What did that stand for? Don't drugs are something extra.
Adrian, do you remember?
What did the DARE program stand for? Could you Google that?
We'd love to know. Our
or
man on staff day.
Was it just dare to not do drugs?
I don't. It's whatever.
Now
it was,
look
it
at
was
America.
Stupid. Whatever it was a painful experience that was almost completely ineffectual.
Now look at America. It's hard to find someone who's not on some kind of drugs.
Right.
Even like caffeine. Caffeine's a freaking drug.
Cheers.
Oh, look! Yeah.
We're literally partaking. But what I want to get back to with this video game thing, we understand.
What does it stand for? Drug abuse resistance education.
Yeah, that gets all the kids
it gets drug abuse. Yeah, a lot of people still abuse drugs, but I think like 9 people out of every 10 that I know are on some form of drugs, whether it be chiefing on weed every other day, or antidepressants, or something for mental health. And so this is why I'm not going to throw shade at all kinds of drugs, but I'm going to say, be responsible. Dare. to be responsible.
Yeah. I want to go back to it.
We started off the conversation in the housing market talking about responsibility.
You did.
It is rare.
Very briefly, I want to give you a real quick recap on what we were talking about before. I apologize that we got a little off topic. That's my bad.
Yeah.
I just wanted to give you a little overview on addiction. So you can tell that video game addiction has gone too long, not necessarily in the number of aggregate hours that you're playing video games or that you see a loved one playing video games, but when the video game starts to take precedence over other things. So if the individual is unemployed, that the video games take precedence over job searching. If the video games take precedence over homework completion and the person is starting to fail in their classes. If video game is taking precedence over family connections and friendships. It's not that video games are inherently bad, it's that video games are taking priority over something that objectively should be more important. Again, if you're playing 2 hours of video games a day or you're playing 5 hours of video games a day, as long as it's not competing with other things that are more important in your life that you should have some interaction with, That's kind of the distinguishing factor.
How dare you try and determine what's important in other people's lives? Video games might be the most important thing in their life.
Well, if it's their job, then yeah, of course it is. But
more important than their kids? No. More important than, paying rent? No.
But that's the idea, is that it's not a matter of it's not just a matter of gross total. It's a matter of reference to other things.
It's all about perspective.
It's all about perspective. And so if you're worried about how much video games you play, something that, I'll be honest, I even did at some point.
You still playing League?
How many, League a little bit here and there. But I looked at how many hours I was spending playing games a day. And I realized I needed to cut down about 15% so that I could have time for the other interactions in my life. Just do a very brief assessment on a 3-day period, and you'll get a really good feel for where you're at. And then you can judge, what do I need to cut in order to make room for the things that matter for me in my life.